Alright guys, so you're cutting, your cardio's up, your calories are low, and then all of a sudden, the weights just feel 30 pounds heavier. Why is that? Well, in today's video, we're going to go over why you lose strength on a cut and simply how to prevent it to the best of your abilities. Let's get into it. So I'm going to go over just 5 simple reasons why your strength is dropping during a cut. Point number 1 I'm going to make is probably maybe the most obvious, at least in my mind is the most obvious, but we have point number 1, or reason number 1, which is our glycogen storages are low. So point number 1 is our glycogen storages are low or depleted, and this is for a number of reasons. What is glycogen? Well, glycogen is simply just the stored version of carbohydrates within your body. So you eat carbs, that is converted into glycogen within the body, and that is stored in your liver, but mainly stored in your muscles. And that's why when people are talking about, oh, I have a nice pump because I just ate carbs, that's because you have more glycogen within your muscles, so you get that pump effect, right? And what do carbs do when we're working out, especially for short bursts or a heavy intense exercise? They give us energy, right? Naturally, when we're cutting calories, which means we're going to be cutting some sort of carbs, some sort of an amount of carbs, right? So then right off the bat, we're just going to have less energy because our muscles are going to be slightly depleted or heavily depleted of carbohydrates. So when you cut your calories and your carbs, your glycogen storages are just naturally going to drop. And we can talk about that. We can write, if we have less glycogen or carbs, right, that will equal less carbs, which then equals less strength. If our glycogen storages are depleted, we're not going to have as much energy within our muscles to push that weight that we normally do, and that is reason number 1 on why our strength drops during a cut. But point number 2 on why we lose strength during a cut is simply just because we have a higher CNS fatigue. Now, what does CNS stand for? It's your central nervous system, and that basically just regulates and controls how hard our muscles contract when we're working out. And if we are in a caloric deficit, or we're sleep deprived, or we're stressed, or we're just eating less calories, our CNS is simply just going to be under recovered, meaning that we're not going to feel as strong when we're lifting again. So something like that, man, I don't really know what's along the lines of that, but basically when we have less calories in, we're just not going to be able to recover as much, especially if we're just sleep deprived or stressed, and that usually happens when we're in a cut, because especially when we get lower, we're going to be in more of a fight or flight mode, we're going to be stressed, and then simply our CNS is just going to have a higher rate of fatigue. And then what does this kind of entail when we're working out? Well, we're going to have less power, right, because our CNS is going to be under recovered, meaning that our motor neuron recruitment is not going to be as adapted, it's not going to be as efficient, right? We're going to have less power in our workouts, the bar speed is going to be slightly slower probably, and then things of that nature. Point number 3 is just simply muscle loss. So if your protein intake is too low or your training intensity drops, naturally our body is going to try to break down some of that protein or muscles to use for energy, and then that can put us in a state of catabolism, which means we're just breaking down some muscle tissue. And this is especially prevalent when we're talking about fast twitch muscle fibers. That's usually what breaks down first. And what are fast twitch muscle fibers? Those are responsible for our explosive strength. So anything with a compound lift or something that we're really doing like a 1 to 3 rep max on, those muscle fibers are just going to tend to be broken down first, which means we're going to be losing explosiveness and strength in that aspect. So point number 4 is simply, bad handwriting, leverage changes. Simply put, when we're talking about leverage changes on bench, right, we're going to have, first of all, we're going to have a more range of motion when we're cut, because we're not going to have as much fatty tissue on our chest and lats. We are also going to have more of a demand on our stabilizing muscles. So for example, our shoulder, right, our shoulder stabilizers, our rotator cuffs, and things of that nature. When we're benching, it's just going to be more of a demand on those certain muscles, those little intricate muscles that play a role in things that we necessarily don't see on our body, right? We're not focused on our pecs, our lats, or our deltoids, right? The little intricate muscles that are just within our shoulder girdle and things like that, they're just gonna have more of a higher demand. And then we're just gonna have a less rebound off the chest, right? Because if we're just having less fatty tissue on our pecs, we're just not gonna be able to get that big of a bounce and explode up like we usually would if we're all big, bulked, and fat. And then specifically too for squat and deadlift, right? If we're having more fatty tissue on our legs and thighs, that may provide more of a passive support, not an active support, but more of a passive support when we're getting low into our squat, and can help us kind of brace a little better, right? And then as we lean out, we're kind of losing some of that intra-abdominal pressure that we have when we're bracing during a squat or deadlift, and that can just cause a reduce in our bottom end strength. It can cause us to have slightly more range of motion within a deeper squat, and that can also just alter our, first off, bar path, but then also just our hip position within a squat or deadlift. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just going to take some time for our motor patterns and our joint stabilizers just to adapt to our new body weight and new bar path and just increased range of motion. So it's not a huge deal, it's something that's just going to happen. Our final point is that we just have a lower recovery capacity. If we're eating less food, we are naturally just going to have a slower recovery or a slower recovery time. What the slower recovery. So even if our training is on point, if we're not recovering efficiently or adequately, what does that mean? That just means our performance is going to drop, plain and simple. So now that we went over 5 reasons why we lose strength or our strength drops during a cut, glycogen storages are low, our CNS fatigue, we have muscle loss, our leverages are changing, and then we just have a lower recovery capacity. Let's just break this down a little more and talk about what we can do to prevent this.